Okay, thank you. So as she said, I'm here to talk about Occupy. So I wanted to start out with a little bit of the Occupy hand signals. So if you all want to follow along with me, this means I agree. It's like applause, but because it's silent, it makes the process go faster. This means I disagree. I'm not feeling it. This means I have a clarifying question. So you're making a C. This means I have a point of information. It's like an I. So, for example, if I was to announce, we have a march at 5 p.m. and you know it's at 6 p.m., you'd say, point of information, it's at 6 p.m. So these are only a couple of the hand signals, but I just wanted to invite you to use them throughout the talk so that we can kind of get the Occupy feel going. So this is the video that first brought me to Occupy. This is a video that was of 3 girls that got corralled by the police and then were maced. And it went viral on YouTube, and I saw this, and then I went to their website and I saw their live stream and decided that I needed to be there. So I realized that some of the things they were protesting were like the child poverty rate in the United States today is 23.1% right here. So here's Iceland, Finland, Cyprus. We're all the way down at the bottom. And then there's other things like between 1980 and 2000, this is the top 1% of the country. The top 1% of the income earners, and that's how much their income has increased. This is how much the rest of our income has increased. Then we have this one, which is splitting up the wealth into the percentages. So this is 1% of the country owns this much of the wealth, whereas the other 80% of the country owns this much. Only 7% of the wealth is owned by 80% of the country. And then finally, we have the income pyramid. So you have the top 1% of the wealth, the next 4%, the next 15%, and the bottom 60%. So it's just a different visualization of it. And then if you see, this is different. So the CEOs are the people that have the most power are at the top, and they have the most money, and then it goes down from there. So it's an interesting juxtaposition. So I saw this happening, and I saw the income inequality, and I was studying political science and economics, and decided that I needed to be there, and I needed to see what was going on. So I got to the park, and immediately the media started asking, because the media had started to pick it up by then. It was like day 9. And immediately the media started asking, what is your demand? What is your demand? Why are you here? What are you protesting? And so I started looking for forums online where the Adbusters had put out this ad that was a call for 10,000 people to come and occupy Wall Street. And it actually ended up only being around 1,000 people, and they had a continued occupation. So day 9 I was able to show up. But the forums online had lists of demands and amazing just difference in demands. And so I started sharing that with the media. I started sharing those links with the media saying, look, these are our demands, these are our demands. And then, I started participating in the consensus process. The consensus process is a directly democratic way of making decisions. There is a group solidarity in sentiment and belief, and it's a process which seeks the consent, but not necessarily the agreement of participants. So a good example of this was when we were in the park. We had problems with drugs and alcohol in the park because we had a huge multitude of people. We had people that were doctors, and then we had people that were street kids. So we had decided as a group that there would be no drugs and alcohol in the park. Some individuals had issue with this because they felt that if we're starting to set a precedent for the future, we don't want to continue this drug war on people. And so they were opposed to it. they didn't agree with the idea of it, but they could consent to it because they understood that by consenting to it, we would be able to keep the park safe and be able to focus on other things besides drugs and alcohol that could have torn apart the inclusionary feeling within the park and made it unsafe. So that was a perfect example of how they were consenting to it where they didn't necessarily agree. And it's from the Latin, which means feel together. So this is me at my first General Assembly. And that was when I really realized that we weren't there protesting. We were there building something else. Occupy is a new form of organizing. It's a new form of letting everyone's voices be heard. And so we didn't care that the media needed to say, what are your demands? Because we weren't there protesting about those demands. We were there, we'd gotten beyond that. We'd said, okay, we have these demands, these are what we have problems with, this is how we're gonna fix it. And we're gonna fix it through using a horizontal structure. So I think that it really made it the ability for us to see that the best leaders make themselves replaceable. So we had situations in which we would have one individual would decide that they were going to run the kitchen for one day, and the next day it would be a different individual. But because they weren't hoarding the information, they were sharing it with everyone, we were able to have a very horizontal structure and just have one individual that took the responsibility for the day. But it didn't have to be a boss. It didn't have to be this hierarchical structure. So if you go back to that pyramid, if you think back on that pyramid with the CEOs and the workers at the bottom, Marx's idea was to get rid of the CEOs, that we just purge the society of all of these, basically what we're calling the 1%. We just purge the society of the 1% and we'll be better. Obviously that didn't work. Because it's the structure. It's the fact that that CEO class will still be able to be there. So as I see it, I see the horizontal structure being an alternative. I see the horizontal structure that we use every day in Occupy as being an alternative to the CEO boss power that's oppressive. And I see that the occupation itself was one of the best advertising campaigns that's ever happened. Because we were able to advertise things, ideas. We were able to advertise the idea of, previously the rhetoric in the US had been that if you're poor because you're not trying hard enough. But we changed the rhetoric to be that if you're poor, it may be because you're being oppressed and you haven't had the same opportunities as everyone else. And we started using the horizontal decision-making process throughout the world. And it was really incredible to see how it blew up. This is beginning of October. This is all the occupations in the beginning of October. By November 5th, this was the occupations. So it spread incredibly fast, and it was beautiful. And it was hard to understand unless you were participating, because it truly is about participating and about feeling empowered and about feeling able to participate in that horizontal structure and really see it work and not have to wait for your boss to tell you what to do. So I think that it was the right time that it happened. And I really see that it's going to happen again. But what's happening with Occupy right now is that it's like mushrooms. We've planted all these little mushrooms in the ground, and you've seen them as occupations. They've grown up. But now we have the mycelia, and it's going out, and it's taking over, and you can't see. It's just underground grassroots. But when the right time happens again, it's going to come out. And we're going to have all these mushrooms pop up again. But we just have to be ready for it. So I think that what's happening right now with Occupy is that we've gotten over the advertising phase. We've already advertised it, people have heard about it, and now it's the organization phase and the structure phase, which is to really solidify the way we want to go about doing things and the way we want to structure things and to figure out how to do things better. So when we were in the park, it became a little village. It was like, oh, I'm so worried about collecting the money, or I'm so worried about taking care of the people, that I didn't have time to talk to the people that would show up in the park and say, hey, I want to help you. And I didn't have the time in my schedule to fit that in. And that was a huge mistake, because there were so many people that really wanted to be able to participate. So I think that now is when we need to start doing like an outreach and expanding it, because I watched it go from 300 people to 4,000 people. I facilitated the GAs for a while, and it was 30 people actually to 3,000 people. 30 people sitting here, and I was facilitating the GAs and doing mic checks, and within 5 days, there were 4,000 people in the park, and I had to stand up on a podium and try to talk to the entire crowd at once, and it just grew faster than we could possibly organize to keep up with it. So I think that now the organization is catching up and is being able to expand and include everyone, but it really is dependent on self-empowerment, on saying, so I walked into the park and I saw that there needed to be, people needed help with the accounting in the park and with the economic structure, and I knew that. So I was able to step in and offer myself as that help. And there were other people that showed up, and they were doctors, and they stepped in to offer themselves as medicals. And it was all volunteer-based and beautiful because it was so volunteer-based. So that was such an amazing experience. So this is just a little picture. I was arrested in the park when we were raided. The police showed up on every side of the park and fenced us in to the center. And we all sat down and locked arms. And then they stood there for 2 hours standing around us while the one of the unions came in and cleaned up, the Teamsters came in and cleaned up everything in the park. And threw away everything into garbage bins. I watched, I think it's 5,400 books that were dumped from plastic crates into dumpsters and compacted. And then I was arrested and held in jail for 30 hours, charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct. And I was trespassing in a public park that, according to law, was open. So I have to go to trial tomorrow, actually, for that. But like I said, the park was the most successful part of it. It was the advertising part of it. But when people see, and I think it really did give people hope. There were so many people that showed up in the park and so many letters that came in. The letters were just heart-wrenching, because I collected a lot of the donations, and we would have checks come in, and with the letter it would say, I don't even have money to feed my family, but this $15 is going to go toward their future. And I think that's more important than their food right now. And those kind of letters were just made me know why we were there. So the future of it, I think it needs to be a long-term thing. And so when I studied economics, I did a project, as Linda said, on cooperative federations. So I basically looked at, right now we have a society where we have an economic system that maximizes profit instead of maximizing utility. And if you go way back in economic history, we wanted to talk about maximizing utility. The whole market structure was to maximize utility, not to maximize profit. But somehow, throughout history, profit and utility have seemed to become synonymous. But as we know, if I paid $1 for this cup and $5 for this piece of paper, that doesn't necessarily reflect the value to me of this cup. It doesn't reflect the value of this piece of paper. So you can't say that costs and values, that profit and utility are synonymous. So my cooperative federation is based on the idea that we want to maximize utility. And that's not just the outcome utility, that's the procedural utility. So the outcome utility is I can drink out of this cup. The procedural utility is how I felt when I went to the store and bought the cup, how the workers who made the cup felt, how eco-friendly it is. That's the procedural utility, and that we need to be able to maximize. So the way to maximize that is to do it in a directly democratic fashion, like with using the consensus process. And so to restructure corporations and make them horizontal and consensus-based. And to be able to do that, you have to put a limit to the size of the branches, but you also have to have a federation of these cooperatives so that they have enough access to capital. Because that is one of the reasons that people try to find investors. So I know that's a really complicated idea, and I can go over it more in questions, or if somebody just wants me to take the time to explain it. But this is basically the idea. So you have your General Assembly when people show up and act as individuals, and they get to decide how the cooperatives operate. So this is like your population saying, we want corporations to, I don't know, we want antitrust laws. We don't want corporations to have monopolies. So your General Assembly gets to say, you don't get to have monopolies. Then the co-ops, to be able to be part of this council, have to agree to everything that the General Assembly states as a rule for the co-ops. So the co-ops then are all federated, and they have a credit union so that they have access to capital, and they also have a university because education is paramount in being able to make this happen. But then these co-op councils can also work with the outside market. So this could be your food co-op, and then you have a cooperative bookstore, you have a cooperative paper mill, and you have a cooperative printing press. And they all work together. And so it's a producer producer cooperatives. And then they're able to participate and compete with the outside market. So you still have the positive competition aspect of the market, but you are not getting rid of the utility that people derive from being able to interact with each other. The directly democratic process is practiced everywhere. Everyone has a GA, and there's different forms. It's morphed into different forms, but it all started as the same directly democratic consensus process. So that's really interesting that that's happened. A lot of the topics that have come out of Occupy have been dealing with income inequality. So there's the Citizens United has been a big push. There's also been a push for, there's been worker cooperatives that have been formed in New York City. There's been the Move Your Money Day, which was on some day. It was on November 5th. And that we moved, I have the details on that actually, but we moved a huge amount of money out of large banks into smaller credit unions. We moved $80 million in new account funds on November 5th alone. And as I remember, November 5th was a Saturday, so banks were only open half day. But September 29th through November 4th, when the Move Your Money Day was publicized, we moved $4.5 billion. Which is an incredible amount of money. So those kind of things have been the same, but then there's also local issues, such as in New York City, there's in Queens, I think, maybe it's in Brooklyn, there's a school that they have decided they're going to shut down, and all of the students decided to occupy it. And they locked arms outside the school and refused to let the administrators that were coming in to sign the papers to shut down the school. And they cleaned up their neighborhood and they cleaned up everywhere around it, and they said, there's no reason for you to shut down the school now. We're going to take it into our own hands. And so a lot of very local efforts like that have been happening, but then you also see the national efforts like Citizens United, Move Your Money Day, and that kind of stuff. Well, there are 5 types of capital. There's the human capital, there's financial capital, there's resource capital, and I'm forgetting the other 2. But for example, a lot of the General Assemblies have been very poor in terms of financial capital, but in terms of human capital, they've been incredibly wealthy. So I guess that would be why you'd use income inequality rather than wealth inequality. In our current system, money does hold more power often than human capital does, but it doesn't have to be that way. I started with the co-op because that's what I saw organically coming out of Occupy. And I would like to speak to, though, the innovation idea, because they've done studies, especially in Mondragon, which was started in 1954 in Spain and is still around. And it is now the 6th largest company in Spain. and they are extremely successful, much more efficient than any other company in Spain, and their innovation is incredible because each individual that is part of this co-op gets a share of you're still going to produce profits, but that's not, the point is that the profits are not your end goal. The utility is your end goal. And so each individual gets a share of the profits, and so they see their own benefit coming back by working harder and by coming up with more innovations and by coming up with their own projects. And so there are many studies that have been done on cooperatives and innovation and debunking the myth that cooperatives lead to a decrease in innovation. The biggest problem with that cooperatives face is access to capital, meaning that they don't have enough money to be able to continue to expand. And so if you put them all in a council like this together, you're able to aggregate their funds and then loan them out to cooperatives as they need them to expand. So that's where the credit union takes part in this, and the other cooperatives are part of it. So it's a stronger formation than if you just had individual worker cooperatives competing in the capitalist system. So an employee ownership doesn't have to have one worker, one vote, and have everybody involved in the decision making, but the employee ownership does have to have them participate and be part of the company, obviously own the company. There's the anti-foreclosure movement, Occupy Our Homes, which was basically because there were all of these mortgages that people are defaulting on because it was the predatory lending system, and we've all heard all these terms. But basically what it means is that the banks went out and found people who couldn't afford the homes and made it, because they thought that because the banks were able to speculate that the home prices would keep increasing, these people that couldn't afford the mortgage of their home would be able to keep refinancing and keep making money off of their home to be able to pay it back. When the home prices stopped increasing, the bubble collapsed and everybody can't pay for their homes anymore. But, this is so complicated. So here's your home price, money, and it's increasing, right? And because this person should really only be able to afford this little home, but because the money is increasing, they can keep refinancing to be able to afford this home. And that's how the bank said that it was okay. So then then the bank is here. Bank. And all of these mortgages came into the bank. But the bank didn't want to hold them, because the bank can't make money off of mortgages. The bank makes money off of taking in money and loaning more money out off of it. So the bank sold the mortgages to investors. Now other investors realized that these mortgages were going to default, that these investors aren't going to get paid. So the money goes here, the investors give them money, and in return they get a payout each month of the mortgage. These people figured out that this is going to collapse. This is a bubble and it's going to pop. And so these people set up a system to bet against these mortgages, and if they default, they get lots of money. And that's called a credit default swap. So because some of these people who figured this out work in the banks. So when people come to the banks to say, hey, we want to refinance our mortgage, we couldn't pay for 3 months, but now we can, we're trying to offer you money, and you're not taking the money and you're not allowing it to refinance, and all that's going to happen to our house is it's going to sit there, the market's dead, it's going to sit there and it's going to go derelict and it's going to fall apart. Why are you taking our home away from us? These people make money off of that. So they continue to push for the foreclosure process. And these other people are homeless. So because that's happened, and because people have figured out that that's going on, they've started the anti-foreclosure teams, which go to, every time there's an auctioneer for a foreclosure, they go to the house and they shout or sing over the auctioneer, so the auctioneer has to come back and reschedule. But that seems to only be a success for like, what, a month? But what happens is that because sometimes these houses are being illegally foreclosed upon, the people are able to go to housing court and able to say, I didn't get a fair chance to refinance my mortgage. I have money that I'm trying to pay. They can't get more money from it in this market. It's in their best interest to take my money, and they're not taking my money, and this is messed up, and I need to be able to get my home back. But it takes 6 or 7 months to get into housing court. So you have to stave off the auctioneer 6 or 7 times before you can get into housing court. And that's really stressful for a lot of families. So they have a lot of young kids that have been moving into these houses for the families, holding people in that house so that any time that the auctioneer comes, it's not empty. And so they've been living in other people's houses, protecting them from foreclosure, and being able to sing over the auctioneers to protect the homes until they're able to get to housing court and own their homes and fight back against the banks. So that's a really cool underground project that's been going on that's like very direct and successful. Other things that they've been doing is there's a green roofing project in New York City. So green roofing is where you try to put a garden on your roof and be able to provide for yourself, but also to try to use solar power and wind power and do anything basically that you can so you don't have to be reliant on your utility bills, or on the system, in the sense that you don't have to pay utility bills. You have more freedom to be able to own and grow your own food and do rainwater catchment and all of these options. So that's a huge push in New York City. I talked about the school, where the children occupied the school and refused to leave, and I don't know if they're going to be successful, but it's a beautiful movement and getting a lot of youth involved. The cooperatives in the Basque region of Spain were started as industrial cooperatives. So it was a steel mill. That was the first cooperative that started in Mondragon, was a steel mill. And so they've done research they're huge, and they've done research looking at the outside market and seeing if their product is what they want to do. They've done research with making their product more ecologically friendly. They've done research with looking at sourcing of goods and where that should come from. They've done research on anything that they need to do research on. It's been done. And I've read a lot of the studies, and even some of the larger corporations refer to Mondragon's studies. Because because you have the cooperative structure, you don't have the fear of not giving the boss the right answer. So they're able to be more ingenious in their ideas because they're able to fail. They're allowed to fail. They're allowed to take on a project and fail, whereas if you have a CEO and hierarchical structure, you're not allowed to fail. You have to have a successful product, and so a lot of times you end up warping it into your research into something that needs to be successful. July 4th is the national gathering in Philadelphia, basically what happened is that a working group from New York and Philadelphia and a bunch of other cities decided that they wanted to have a national gathering of all the occupations to be able to come together and just discuss topics and issues and solutions and what's the best course going forward. So that national gathering is supposed to be taking little bits of information from all of the local occupies, and then also taking the individuals from the local occupies and bringing it into like a human capital hub. I haven't seen anybody being like, oh, we should all be part of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, because one of the points of it is that you have this multitude of voices. And so by separating it into only 2 groups, you're limiting. Plus, there were Republicans staying with me in the park, and there were Democrats staying with me in the park, self-identified. So it's hard to say that the movement feeds into one or the other. I don't know how it's going to affect the upcoming election, but I do think that it's definitely changed the conversation from being about the debt ceiling to being about income inequality, which is sometimes something that the tax policies of the more conservative or the more Republican, because it's not necessarily a conservative ideal, candidates can't necessarily tackle. Anonymous decided that they were going to join, so the Adbusters put out the call, and Anonymous decided that they were going to join. Okay, I'll back up, thank you. Anonymous is a hacktivist group, that's what they call themselves. They are hacker activists who have decided that in order to do direct action online, they need to be able to hack sites and to share personal information. They are a very loosely knit group, so sometimes things come out that are not great that they've done, and sometimes things come out that they've all been supportive of. But it's sort of like Occupy in the sense that there's millions of ideas coming out every day, and sometimes the ideas are terrible and they just get swept by the wayside, and sometimes the ideas are awesome and everybody joins on them and they actually become something. And so Anonymous is sort of similar in the fact that some of the ideas that come out and the videos that are made are not supported by the entire group, and it's just one individual that feels that this should be something that's going on. But they decided to add themselves to the Occupy Wall Street movement on August 23rd and to endorse it. So we had in some cases it was beneficial. For example, when we had the tech team, and apparently every day there are cyber threats and attacks trying to take down the Occupy Wall Street website. And so Anonymous, the people who understand the hacking and can understand the ins and outs of that, have been able to protect the web page and keep it up and running. Yeah, they haven't done any actions because it's not like one person. It's hard to know. They're not going to say, "Hi, I'm part of Anonymous." You just have an idea that it might be them because they're very activist and very tech savvy, but you have no idea. Basically, the Tea Party movement is pushing for, the Occupy movement is against big business, and the Tea Party movement is against big government. And there's a lot of overlap in that, but it doesn't necessarily have to overlap. So there's been protests like, we did an NDAA protest in Worcester, Massachusetts. I did with the Occupy Worcester, and it was a Tea Party and Occupy joint protest because it was very... Oh, sorry. NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act. It allows for indefinite detention of American citizens without trial. And so that's something that they believe is not constitutionally okay. And that's something that we believe is not constitutionally okay and run by corporations. So they believe it's because of the government it's too big. We believe it's because, well, I can't say we, but I believe it's because of the corporate influence that has allowed this to come to pass. So when they come together, you're both against NDAA, but you may be from different sides. So I see Occupy as, if we'd had the support of the corporations, we would have had a whole lot more media attention and a whole lot more success. But because we're against the corporations, we don't. So I see it as a similar sort of grassroots idea, but there's a lot more capital power, financial capital power in the Tea Party because they have the support of the money of the corporations and the corporate influence, which is what we're fighting against. The demographics of Occupy it's everywhere, but let's see. One of my friends at Clark University did his master's thesis actually on analyzing the business practices of Occupy and analyze the demographics. He said that it is predominantly, in the people that he found, it was predominantly young, so 20-somes. But the other thing that he found was that he was only looking at the parks. He wasn't looking at the communities on the outsides. And because it's so in some senses it's very tight-knit, and in some senses it's very loose-knit. And so it could be anybody that's calling themselves an occupier, and he just went to the specific sites. Having lived in the park, I saw, living in the park, it was mostly white, but that was because there was a fear of arrest, and as a white individual, I would be charged much less harshly than anyone that was a minority would be. So they participated in outside communities and meetings and other things, but they didn't end up living in the park as much because there was that fear of police retaliation. And what else did I see? It kind of was self-identifying who lived in the park, because it couldn't be, you had to sleep on the street. So that eliminated a group of people. You had to be young enough to be able to work on small hours of sleep and then sleep at long periods of time and have a strange schedule. But then you also had to be of the demographic that was able to take off that much time from supporting a family or from working to be able to do that. So it was kind of self-selectionary in that sense, but the support I felt was completely everywhere. The biggest numbers we ever got was when we worked with the unions. So we had the union march, and that was something like 30,000 people that showed up. And then by the end of the day, there were only 2,000 in the park. So it was people that had come out for the day for that action and then gone home. But the continued presence was what made it such an influence. So, yes?
Did you feel like the people of the city of New York were supportive of you in general, or how did you feel?
Absolutely. They either would come up and scream at you and tell you to get a job, or they would be extremely supportive and ask how they could help. And I think that since I was dealing with donations and accounting for donations and taking in money, one of the interesting stories is that I would put out the boxes in the morning at each of the stations. So we had a medical station, we had a media station, we had a kitchen, we had basically a free thrift store that we called Comfort, and each of these stations had its own donation box, and I would collect $10,000 in cash in a trash bag at the end of the day from those. And carry that around the park. So that was an interesting story tidbit. So I saw a lot of support, but I also wasn't one of the ones that was holding a sign on the outside, and they seemed to be getting more of it was almost like we had a boundary. The people that were interested and supportive got to get inside the park, and the people that were not interested and not supportive got stuck at screaming at the people holding the sign. So since I wasn't holding a sign, I didn't get to see as much of it. But we did have something like mid-October, we had more than 80% of the population of the United States was supportive of Occupy. The Time poll did that. Yes?
You were responsible for collecting the cash, maybe checks too. Where did you hold your money?
We put it in the Amalgamated Bank, which it's a union bank, and it's been around for a while. And we had a 501c3 status because we had a fiscal sponsorship from Alliance for Global Justice, so we were technically a project of Alliance for Global Justice. Jail was eye-opening because I was arrested, and then they did the cuffs too tight, so I lost feeling in my hands and still have some numbness here from the cuffs. And I was in a bus waiting to be processed for 7 hours, just sitting in the bus in handcuffs. We weren't allowed to leave. There were stories about other protesters and other buses apparently peed in trash cans because they weren't not allowed to go outside and use the bathroom. And so when we finally came in and got processed, they carried us through, or they took us through. I was attached to 4 other girls with a chain link, and they called us bodies. And so they'd say, how many bodies you got, instead of people. And then, what were some of the comments? So we're walking in. We had just gotten processed. We're walking down like the hallway. We were told that we were not allowed to leave and that we wouldn't be arraigned, so we'd be stuck in jail indefinitely unless we agreed to take the retinal scan, which is actually wrong because the retinal scan is optional. And so, whatever. I tried to get them to put it in writing, and then they started taking pictures of me, and so I was a little scared and stopped. But I'm standing there getting my picture taken. No, I'm standing there doing my fingerprints, and there's a girl that's getting her picture taken, and so they say, "What's your name? How old are you?" And she says, "I'm 16." And they were all like, "Oh my God, she's 16." And one of the officers turns to the other officer and says, "No wonder they're getting raped down there." We had a couple sexual assaults that happened in the park. The speculation has been that the sexual assaults were actually, this sounds like a weird conspiracy theory, but we had people that were being paid by the New York City Police Department to come into the park and cause problems. And they would admit to it because we had a security team, and the security team would take them out and get them drunk and be like, "Are you just a crazy person or are you working for somebody?" And they'd get drunk and be like, "Oh yeah, police is paying me." So there's the 2 sexual assaults that we had seemed to be paid for by the New York City Police Department. And then the women came forward, went to the police and said, "We'd like to file reports." And the police told them that they were dirty hippies and that they had brought it upon themselves. So that was disgusting, and I can't believe that happened. And then we went to a different facility, separate facility. It was a corrections facility, which is actually illegal because I was charged with a violation, which is the equivalent of a traffic ticket. And I was taken to a corrections facility and held in jail there. And the female officers there, who was watching out for our jail cell, told us that we shouldn't ask for anything or they might lose our papers. So after 30 hours, I left the jail cell being so angry. And everyone around, all the women around me, all the girls around me, I guess, it was all of our first time in jail. And it was really stressful and hard. And so I got out, and there's a jail support that stands by when you have a number of arrested people. And the jail support stands outside, and they have food and blankets and hugs. And that was the most amazing thing that's ever happened. So that was beautiful and such an eye-opening experience. I see a lot of the individuals within the Occupy movement, myself included, almost not trusting legislation. And here's a good example. So you have Standard Oil, way back in the early 1900s, is one monopoly. Then you have the antitrust laws that come through, I think it was in 1914, early 1900s, and they split into what is now, or what was, Exxon and Mobil. Now, less than 100 years later, Exxon and Mobil are together again. They're basically what Standard Oil was, but under a different name. So to really have that legislation stick, you have to change somehow the structure that allows those kind of, the politics of corporations to permeate throughout our world. So I do think that we have to have a multifaceted effort. And there have been lots of conversations on how to change the government and how to make it stronger. But I personally have focused more on the economic aspect of it. Yeah, so it's my belief that the best alternative is to create an alternative that focuses on horizontal values, and as you create that alternative and as it becomes stronger and you have more people that are able to move to that alternative and choose it as their option, you're not forcing this upon anybody. You're just building this system and saying, I believe that this system is better than the other system, and I believe that people will come and join the system. And as that begins to get stronger, you start to build on top of it, and it builds itself. Yes?
Thank you, Brianna. I think you spent a lot of yourself today. Thank you.